My name is Dr. Allison Gill, and you may have noticed there's been a lot of news recently about the former administration's weaponization of the Department of Justice with regards to going after political enemies. We've heard about the DOJ subpoenas of a wide swath of Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee, and subpoenas and gag orders of journalists from the Washington Post to the New York Times and even CNN. And today, we learned that the former president attempted to get the Department of Justice and the FCC to investigate or stop Saturday Night Live and late night talk show hosts for teasing him. Many Americans are outraged by this, as they should be, and many others are surprised, but I am not, because it happened to me. I began working for the Department of Veterans Affairs in 2009. In fact, I took the executive oath of office the same day President Obama did, on January 20th, which was also my birthday. I wanted to get back to government service since I had taken over a decade-long hiatus after I left the military in 1996. I worked my way up from a GS-5 medical clerk to a GS-14 health systems specialist in less than a decade, and I earned my doctorate in health administration because I planned on retiring from the VA. It was my career. I decided that was what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And in 2016, I asked for an ethics waiver so that I could run as a delegate for a Democratic candidate for president. It could be a violation of the Hatch Act to run for office, and I did not want to run afoul of any ethics or Hatch Act provisions. So I was granted the waiver, and I ran. I lost, but I ran. But now the government knew I was a Democrat. The day Trump was sworn in, he filed to run again in 2020, making any political fundraising in opposition to him a violation of the Hatch Act. A month later, the Office of General Counsel under Trump commandeered my employee records. They called me and said they were getting them. They couldn't tell me why, but by the rules, they were obligated to inform me of the requisition. Cut to October of 2018, 5 months after Robert Mueller was appointed as special counsel to investigate the Trump campaign's ties to Russia and any potential obstruction of justice. Trump had just updated the Hatch Act rules to not only forbid fundraising for candidates for political office, but to specifically forbid any government employee from using his name in a negative light. But I did feel the historical gravity of the Mueller appointment, and I decided to start a podcast about the special counsel investigation called Mueller, She Wrote. But I remembered that my records had been requisitioned, and I didn't want to run afoul of the Hatch Act, so I actually hired an expert, a lawyer, to advise me. I used a pseudonym. I went by AG during the podcast. I ensured I was not posting on social media during certain hours. I definitely didn't work on the podcast except at nights and on the weekends. I made sure not to take part in any activity that was even adjacent to fundraising for political candidates. Yet in April of 2019, after my supervisor and his supervisor had retired, I was told that my job was no longer available in San Diego and I would have to move to DC or I would be fired. Now, I had been offered my supervisor's position in DC months earlier when he was retiring, but I had to turn it down. I said, my family is in San Diego. My home is in San Diego. I can't leave San Diego. So they knew that I couldn't move. We then learned in August of that same year, 2019, that Trump's chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, gave a speech to Republican donors during which he told them he'd learned a new trick to get rid of non-loyal left-wing government employees by moving their job across the country, just as he had done with mine and just as they had done with the FDA scientists, for example. And when they made that offer, I chose to be fired. Now, the same day that story broke about Mick Mulvaney, I got a call from my new supervisor, the job I was supposed to get, but turned down. And I was told that my podcast was now under investigation and I was required to answer his questions. I asked for representation during the fact-finding call and I was denied. I asked again and I was denied again. They said I had to answer their questions. I figured no big deal since I was just waiting around to be fired anyway. That week, I was told I needed to report to DC. I reminded them I declined that offer and requested to be fired, and then I put in a request for a reasonable accommodation for telework. They denied that request. My lawyers pushed back, saying I couldn't possibly be in DC, so they eventually ceded but they gave me a very retaliatory telework agreement. And I'd been previously teleworking a few days a week, but they wanted me to pick up my phone within 5 rings. I couldn't let it go to voicemail. I had to be available in Messenger, Instant Messenger at all times. I had to call and tell them when I was taking lunch and breaks. And I found out that I was the only one in the office that was given these restrictive requirements. So we filed a formal EEO complaint for retaliation and discrimination. And it wasn't until March of 2020 that the VA decided to terminate me, but they decided to terminate me for being medically unfit because they didn't want to grant my reasonable accommodation request. I'm litigating now with a decision from the agency on my settlement due today, the day that I recorded this speech, June 22nd. I will let you know what they say. But one really interesting unintended consequence of the entire ordeal was that by removing me, they freed me up from underneath the Hatch Act. And I and my podcast and some other podcasts I work with were able to raise about $500,000 for Biden and Harris and Ossoff and Warnock. So although they tried to fire me, I turned around and helped fire them. It's so important to speak out, and I stand with all whistleblowers now and forever. Thank you so much.